this phase of leaving the familiar. And letting go is, again, it's really about an internal reality. You're letting go of those operating patterns, those formulaic ways of living that have defined you. There's a way that we need to let go of that. And there's a lot more to unpack there. But that's what then plunges us into this next phase, which is the unknown. This is an area of profound discomfort. This is an area that we do not like to go to or talk about as a society, right? But this is the area where all the magic happens. This is where growth and transformation occur.
Welcome to Untangle. I'm Patricia Karpas. We are so happy you're with us today. As always, we are the podcast from Muse, the brain sensing headband that helps to transform your brain. It is great for sleep, for meditation, for focus, and so much more. Use promo code Untangle15 at choosemuse.com for your discount. Now, on to today's guest. Ben, it's great to have you on Untangle. Welcome.
Thank you, Patricia. So good to be here.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that we've had some of your colleagues on Untangle, and I was really excited when I saw that you had your book, which we mentioned a little bit in the intro. But I would love to hear your story of how you came to this work and what inspired you to write The Way Home.
Huge question. I'll try to keep my answer relatively brief, but I would say I've my career, my work has had a lot of twists and turns, but at its core, there's a through line, and that is whatever expression it's taken, it's for the most part involves some combination of spirituality and inner life. So working on our interior world, deepening that community and belonging, and then social healing, social transformation service. It's about how do we contribute in terms of renewing and healing the world. So presently, what that looks like is I'm a faculty in residence at Modern Elder Academy. I do one-on-one and group coaching with a program I have called The Journey Within, which is related to the themes of my book. And then I've been a meditation teacher for about 7 or 8 years, do a lot of that right now in correctional facilities in the state of Wisconsin, where I live. Previous iterations of this work involved, I was an ordained minister and pastor for a while, started a church in Seattle in my late 20s. We started a community center serving people dealing with addiction, to illness, homelessness, lots of people who had experienced a lot of trauma and created a safe place of belonging. And I've been a hospice chaplain. And I also was a tap room manager at my brother's brewery. So we could fit that in there too. So lots of different things.
Amazing.
Lots of unknown at different times, but continue to follow this sense of calling that I have.
Wow. What inspired you to become a minister? And maybe a little bit of who you were as a kid, like your spiritual questions and journey in that time of your life.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the gifts of my childhood, I'm actually thinking we were talking about my former colleague, Krista Tippett. I worked at On Being for a bit, and, you followed her work, but she has that question in all her interviews. Tell us about the spiritual or religious background, right? Tell us about your
Yeah.
childhood in that regard.
Yeah.
And for me, it was an incredible gift to grow up in a Christian family in a church context where I was immediately part of a bigger family and experienced a profound sense of belonging. And also, the gift of that container was there was very much a lens of service and contribution to humanity, to the world. And then obviously this piece of encouraging and supporting your connection with the divine. Now, over time, I had to find my own way with that. But from a young age, I did have this sense of relationship with something more, with the divine, which was an incredible gift. And eventually kind of graduated out of that. But the initial phase of that is I came out of college, I went to divinity school. That led me to becoming a minister, and I started a church in my late 20s, which I
Wow.
don't know what I was thinking in a way, but one of the gifts of that was it really enabled me to be at least who I understood myself to be at that point in time, and not have to fit into the certain box of what maybe religion or Christianity needs to look like, and it enabled us to really create this really amazing community. So many of those people are still dear friends of mine, but a community dedicated to not only their own personal growth and transformation, but to service, to helping others.
That's pretty amazing because our 20s are such a time of questioning and conflict and for you to know at that time that you wanted to be a minister is pretty incredible. And then what was your journey beyond that? Because we're going to talk about midlife transitions and transformation and your work on the hero's journey, but wasn't that a big transition going into being a minister and then transitioning out of being a minister?
Yeah,
Can you talk about
absolutely.
that? Yeah.
So in my early 30s, after having started that church and a few other what I would say scrappy nonprofit organizations in a short period, while my wife was in graduate school and we had 3 young kids, I got to a point where the story is I was out running in Seattle one morning. I was on my way home. I got to the top of this hill. Usually I'd turn the corner and, run home and get into my work for the day. But on this one particular day, I just stopped in my tracks because this voice welled up inside of me and it said, if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. And it was this mystical moment and related to the hero's journey, I'd say this was my call to adventure. And right away, I knew this was a signal that something needed to shift in my life. Now, it took time to kind of peel back the layers of that, but that really thrust me into a new phase of my life, my sense of self, and ultimately the work I do.
You talk a bit about that whisper, that moment that takes you in a completely different direction. But it's a beautiful line, if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. But what was missing that how do you think
Yeah.
about that message now?
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing was very clear I was burned out. But as I peeled back the layers, like, well, why am I burned out? Why am I burned out again? And what I discovered through the help of others and my own soul searching, which was really a 5-year inner journey, and that's what I talk about in my book, The Way Home. But it was that I had developed this, and there's lots of reasons for this, but I developed this allegiance to achievement, to pursuing perfection, right? That's going to happen. It's quite elusive. And also performing to please others, to please others as if these things would earn me love and affection. And what was interesting is because of the work I did, which was meaningful, it was spiritual, it
Mhm.
was impactful, it was with great people. I think I had sort of shielded myself from seeing that I did have these underlying operating patterns. We could look at our culture or society and say, achievement, perfection, performance, these are things that we value collectively, or at least how a lot of us move through the world. And they work for a while until we reach these points, often at midlife, where we realize this ain't working anymore. And so for me, because I was in quote unquote virtuous work, I wasn't climbing some corporate ladder. I was unable to see that there still were these other motivations that were shaping how I showed up in the world and were ultimately led to me, in a sense, it's like my soul turned off the lights and snuck out the back door and I didn't even notice. So that morning, if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. It definitely was a wake up call and it was inviting me to find another way of moving through the world and that would involve this idea of reclaiming my heart, who I really am and why I'm here.
And I'm curious, why then did you decide not to be a minister? It seems like, so I'm thinking when you talk about an
Yes.
underlying operating pattern, it had something to do with your ego and, like you were saying, all these goals for
Yes.
achievement. And that was translated in your work as a minister. So, really making those shifts, you felt like, I got to change the whole thing. And I wonder how people decide to make the really big changes versus making small changes.
Yeah. Well, I love that question because so in my coaching or in workshops with Modern Elder Academy, I think it's really important to emphasize that when we go on this inner quest, this soul journey, when we get our heart back, when we're shedding the grip of our ego, this may lead us right back where we started in terms of the surface of our life, the relationships, the work we're doing, where we live, lots of things. It does, just because we do this inner work, it doesn't mean we have to leave everything behind in terms of what we're doing. But for me, part of what I uncovered, going within enabled me to realize that work or showing up in those systems, there was a way that I was muting my own voice. I was playing small. I was not able to fully express or tap into this deeper sense of self. And so this is why it's always important for me to honor my upbringing, my religious background, It was a beautiful container, but you almost think about it, it was a potted plant, and my roots grew, but they could only grow so far. And for the roots to grow deeper and the plant to grow bigger, that pot needed to be shattered and I needed to be replanted. And so that's really what that inner journey was about, and gave me clarity. After a 4-year period, I left the church initially, but I still had a role kind of in that space more broadly, coaching and supporting others. But I had absolute clarity that that sort of delivery system for this work of spirituality and community and social healing, I needed a different way to go about that in the world. And I will say, it's if that's your sense of calling, which it is for me, it's kind of it's hard to know where to place that, especially if sort of church or institutional religion is a place where you're able to do that. It's like, where else do I go to do that? And fortunately, I've been able to find places like On Being, I would say Modern Elder Academy, and there's a lot more interesting, we could say, institutions or delivery systems that are enabling people, because there's a heightened interest in these matters, to be about these kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And what it sounds like you're talking about is a journey to your own personal wholeness. And you do discuss that a lot in the book. And what does wholeness look like for each of us? And it doesn't sound like you were fiercely unhappy. It sounds like you felt only partly fulfilled and knew that somehow, and maybe not knowing what it is, which many of us might feel, but you knew there was something else. In the book, you talk about the hero's journey and you use that as the metaphor for getting on this path of transformation. Why did you choose the hero's journey as your metaphor for
Yeah.
midlife? And
Yeah,
also,
I
it
love
sounded
it.
like when you first made your shift, you were in your 30s.
Midlife. At Modern Elder Academy, Chip Conley, the founder, he'll often say, if you're at a workshop, he'll, and this is a spoiler if you haven't been there, he'll say, "Is anyone here 54?" Inevitably someone will raise their hand, and then he'll say, "Okay, so you became an adult when you were 18." Oh, he'll say, "How long do you think you're going to live?" They'll say, a lot of people say 90. Say 90 because we're living longer. 90 feels like a good number. And then I'll say, "Okay, so if you're going to live till you're 90 and you became an adult when you're 18, where does that place you in your adulthood?" And it's like 54 is dead center, 36 years, 18, 36 years to 90. And it's kind of amazing when you think about that. It's like, wow, that means there's a lot of life left here, right? So that's a big part of MEA's work, is helping people, especially as we're living longer, to not just, have that quantity of life, but that quality. So MEA in a way says midlife could be, and it's not just them, a lot of people are saying this, it might be 35 to even 65. And then you kind of have the later third of life. And so I was my early 30s. I was 33, 34 when this all began. So definitely on the front end. But I even, in terms of midlife, for me, I actually like to define it even broader than that. And here's what I mean. I think midlife, yes, we can talk about it as an age range, but I really think about it as, in its fullness, it's a life stage. And by that, I mean it's a transition or a hinge point between who you've been and who you're becoming. And that is really does not care about age. That could be in your 20s, that could be in your 30s, could be in your 80s. And part of why I say that, and this is, it's sort of playful here, but with my book, and I'm grateful for my publisher, but they chose the word midlife in the title. I actually I was like, we don't need to put that in there. They're like, we should put it in there because your journey speaks to that. It's like, okay, fine, let's go with it. It's amazing the doors that's opened in the relationships. And I really do think, especially Modern Elder Academy, but I do think this hero's journey is a powerful framework for helping us understand navigating midlife, whether we think of that as an age change or this life stage. This was a term coined by Joseph Campbell, 20th century mythologist. He looked across cultures, religions, myths, and he saw this storyline, this pattern, and he called it the monomyth, later hero's journey. And it's this idea that there is this universal pattern that is communicated about our human journey of transition and, at a deeper level, transformation. And he has his framing, but I articulate, he's got 3 phases. And I say I call those 3 phases leaving the familiar,
Mm.
falling into the unknown, and rising to wholeness. So that's what I explore in my book by looking at sort of 10 steps or stages along, throughout those phases. But I think why it's so helpful as a metaphor is because it does capture, that what I experienced that on that run was the sense of you have to leave. There's something that you've outgrown this. It doesn't work anymore. Temptation is to plunge into, well, what's next and how do I figure this out? But in reality, what most of us can say is there is this underworld, there is this unknown, this dark night of the soul that we have to go through in the process of reclaiming who we really are and why we're here for that next chapter of our life. And what I'll say is, last thing is, I lived it first. I was familiar with the hero's journey because it's something that's been popularized in Hollywood and movies and things like that. But I lived it. And then I was reflecting back on my experience after about five years, and I was rereading Joseph Campbell. The light bulb went off. I was like, this is what I went through. And his work is kind of dense. I was like, what would it be like to tell my story woven together, through this lens of the hero's journey in a way that can support everyday people who are navigating transitions and pursuing transformation.
Is it is it always and I want you to talk a little bit more about those steps that we go through, because sometimes it's when people have that moment like you had, that something's not right and there's a message or a whisper that comes through. Sometimes people have a natural transition. They retire from a job and they want to not reclaim, but reinvent themselves.
Yes.
And so, how do we go along? What are some steps that you take people through to go through that discovery? And I just want to say one thing. I remember when I was going through, like, I think I was turning 50, and someone said to me, now is the time where you have to think more about who you are versus what you do. And at that moment,
Yes.
now it seems like, well, yeah, of course, right? But at that moment, it was like, yeah, like I had never thought, I had always been like, I'm a media executive in New York City and da 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 da. Like, I never thought about those sort of deeper questions. So I
Yeah.
thought that was, yeah. So I'd
Yeah,
love
it's true.
to
I love that. So
understand how we go through that.
I want to pick up on something you said. It's not reclaim, but reinvent. And what I'll say is, what I mean by reclaiming your heart.
Hmm.
This is about going inside of ourselves, and learning to live from the inside out as opposed to outside in. And that means as opposed to the expectations of others in society, as opposed to smaller versions of ourselves, sort of the ego, the masks we wear, right? Achiever, perfectionist, performer, controller, whatever it might be. And so it's from that place then that any reinvention happens. It's because it's coming out of a place of deep alignment. So then on the surface of our life may, like I said earlier, it might look exactly the same, or it might be a ton of reinvention where we live and relationships and the work we do, right? So, but it's all about reclaiming heart, is about shifting your center of gravity from something external to what is internal. So for me, that morning, that call to adventure that came, if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. It's like a mystical moment. That's what I explore this in my book a bit. And I say, it doesn't matter what you believe or what you call it. What matters is that you pay attention. And I think, even research shows that far more of us than will admit it have had experiences that are sort of ineffable, or we can't communicate, or we can't put words to it, but it's a sacred experience that has some insight or guidance for our life. So that's one category, but that's not how the call to adventure comes for everyone. It might come in, like you said, a transition. Well, I've left a job, or I got divorced. Like, that's already happened. And now in that transition, and we don't always do this, but there's an invitation. And the invitation is, don't just see this as a transition from point A to point B. See this as an invitation to transformation, a shifting of your inner world. There's the willing transitions, but then there's also, I tend to call them tragedies or challenges. It's the unexpected transition, loss of a loved one, sudden end of a relationship we weren't planning on. You get fired. You're dealing with an illness, right? All these things there's this pain, there's this suffering, difficulty you're facing, also an invitation. This is why, uh, not this isn't true of everyone, but you can think of those people who've gone through incredible loss, and you know some of them, and you see them, and they're like so vibrant and vital, even though they've endured like the most difficult thing. Well, why is that? Because in a way they responded not right away. But they responded to what they were going through as an invitation into living more fully. Part of what that means is they've really faced their grief and loss, right? So we have the mystical, we have the transitions, we have the tragedies, the unwanted, unexpected transitions. But there is just this dissatisfaction or discontentment. And if we tune into that and get real about it, rather than just shifting things on the surface of our life, if we're really honest about it, that also is a cue to go inward and pay attention, slow down, listen, and see what might want to, what our heart might want to tell us. So that's a variety of ways that this call to adventure can come. Last one I'll say is there are also just physical cues, right? Sometimes our body, it's breaking down or something's happening and it's trying to tell us something. We don't always notice it, but we look back and be like, oh, wow, that coincided with this other thing. I wish I would have paid attention and listened. So you can see this journey can begin in a number of ways. There's no one size fits all, but I do think the more we resist it, because resistance is part of this for all of us, and the longer we resist it, the louder it becomes until something in a louder way needs to get our attention to change.
Yeah, yeah. I love how you call these moments of transition an invitation versus a gift. And maybe you also call it a gift at some other point. But I think the idea that it's an invitation to look at life a little bit differently. But how do you help people deal with the discomfort of that moment? Because it's always easier to philosophize before and after. But once we're in, I think you call it the belly of the whale, or maybe that's what
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell
Yeah.
calls it. What does that look like in for real? Like for real,
Yeah.
for the most of us, what
Yeah.
does that look
Yes.
like?
Yes. Okay. I love it. So I'll give a little more context and then dig into that. So if the first step, and this is in my framing for it, Joseph Campbell has 17 steps and he's much more thorough, but I think this is a very accessible way to engage it, 10 simple steps. But the first one is that answer the call, right? The call to adventure, like we're
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah.
We're going to have to confront some level of resistance. Resistance shows up in all kinds of ways. We want to just modify things, make some surface level changes, or we distract ourselves. We entertainment and travel and romance, or we kind of cause some chaos or conflict. We might you know, create issues in our relationships or at work. And so suddenly we're almost redirecting that energy instead of internally. We're just like, oh, there's all this other stuff, or this is your issue, it's not mine. So there's a few other ways as well, but I'll just sort of leave it. There's ways we resist. But ultimately, when you answer the call, help arrives. So step two is get help. You both pursue support, friends, therapists, spiritual directors, learning up things like Modern Elder Academy, workshops, things like that. You start listening to that guidance. And then the third step is you actually let go. This is the final step of both saying yes to that call to adventure, but also this phase of leaving the familiar. And letting go is, again, it's really about an internal reality. You're letting go of those operating patterns, those those formulaic ways of living that have defined you. For me, that achiever, right? That piece. There's a way that we need to let go of that. And there's a lot more to unpack there. But that's what then plunges us into this next phase, which is the unknown. It's the belly of the whale, which is from the biblical story of Jonah and the whale, but it's the dark night of the soul. This is an area of profound discomfort. This is an area that we do not like to go to or talk about as a society, right? But this is the area where all the magic happens. This is where growth and transformation occur. In terms of practically what that looks like, well, it takes practice. It takes practices. So this is where, you are a big proponent of meditation. Practices like journaling and reflection on your life and your story are really important. And there's a whole host of journaling practices. Rewilding, so reconnecting with nature, paying attention to your dreams. I could go on and on. There's a lot of these I reference in my book, but we have to slow down, This doesn't mean we check out from our life. Some people might have the luxury of a sabbatical, but you don't need that. Are there micro moments each day that you can begin to carve out where you're weaning yourself off of sort of the script you've been living on and society's script for you, and you are attuning yourself to that soul level script, that soul level way of being. And that's where the center of gravity is shifting now. And and being present to all the uncomfortable things that happen there, facing your shadow, carrying your grief, sitting and living the questions, holding the questions, acknowledging the complex and various feelings you have, tending to your wounds. All this stuff, difficult, it takes time. And yet, this is the place of our healing and that reconnection to who we really are.
And is it always a journey of healing versus, when you go through these steps, like you and I were talking before we got on into the interview, we were talking about Parker Palmer. And one of the things that he had said when I interviewed him, and he said this often in his books, that his 3 major bouts of depression throughout his life were the most ultimately, I don't know if rewarding is the right word, but they added so much depth and understanding to his life. But I don't think that when we go through transitions or major life transformations, we always have to tap into that deepest, darkest part. And I think that may even scare some people. Does it
Mm.
always? I mean, you use the word healing. There are a lot of people who go through midlife that, again, even if it's reclaiming or reinventing or reestablishing, it isn't so much about healing as about finding this core purpose for this next stage of your life. But do
Yeah.
you think it
Yeah.
always has to go through the belly of the whale?
It does for those who say yes to the call. And I think we
Huh.
can talk about this as so I had someone on, it was another conversation. This was like in the world of finance. And he says to me, he's like, well, what would you say to someone? Say you were giving this talk at an event, someone came up to you in the hallway and they're like, well, why does this matter to me? Why does it matter to me? And like instinctually, what I said was, it doesn't matter until it matters. Doesn't matter until it matters. And so, what are you even talking about? But what I mean is, look, if you are someone who you're looking to go through, like there's a transition, you're ready, and you want to rediscover your purpose. Absolutely. There are multiple levels at which we can do this. And I don't mean this even in a hierarchical sense, but you could say there's the 101 version of this. There's the 201 level. There's the 301. And if where you're at and your awareness and what you're willing to navigate, if you aren't ready or don't even sense a pull to that sort of deeper level, that's fine. You still can get clarity and insight. Absolutely. So, and that's why even at Modern Elder Academy, for example, I'm talking about stuff related to my book, my story. But if you look at our offerings there's stuff that meets people in all seasons of life. And that's what I love. It's helping people navigate transitions and cultivate purpose and connect with their wisdom. And there's different levels almost at which we can approach that work. Having said that, I do think for those for whom it doesn't matter until it matters, what I mean is, if you are at a place where you're like, I'm stuck, I'm lost, I'm disoriented, um, and by the way, oh, I'm here again, I've been here before, like especially pay attention to that. Typically, that's a sign where you have an awareness that these other operating patterns, these ways of being, they no longer fit you. And let me just unpack that for a little longer to connect it to this idea of healing. Typically, those operating patterns, or I call them masks, well, why are we wearing them? Because we learned to wear them at a young age because of our family of origin, our cultural setting, religious background, society, gender roles, all these things. And we learn to wear them because they keep us safe, they help get our needs met, they help us navigate the world, make sure we don't get picked on the playground, like these things. So in that way, they are a profound gift to us. They're talked about this as persona. What a gift to us. But often in midlife, we might realize that doesn't fit anymore. And that can't be the thing that governs our way of being going forward. So, well, what do we do about that? We could ignore it. It's likely to come up again because it wants to grip and guide us in terms of how we move through the world. It's trying to keep us safe still. To shed that, to let go of that is how we really allow those other parts of ourselves to emerge. Okay. So in that sense, tending to those, doing that other work, this is where there is healing because we're acknowledging that while this thing has really helped us, it has harmed us. We're acknowledging that while there's a lot to be grateful for, well, look at this career, look at this life I've built. Wonderful. There's ways it's also, there's stuff to grieve because it's hurt us and it's probably hurt others. And it's keeping us, even if outwardly it looks like we have it all together, it's keeping us from something that we know is there, something more that wants to come through. So I know that's a lot, but I'm curious if that brings up any other questions.
Well, it does in the sense that I think there are a lot of people that would resonate that this would resonate very deeply with, and they already feel that need to face more of their grief and their shadow, and that they need, like you're saying, there has to be that willingness to do that. And then I also think that there are people that really resonated with who they've been their whole lives and want to take that and use that as the foundation for what they do in this next stage of their lives. So would
Yeah.
people go through different processes or different coaching depending on what their proclivities might be?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to take it on a case by case basis, but I will say and I've worked with so many people. There's a staggering number of people for whom we are grateful for who we are, and that's beautiful. And yet, maybe we can't see it yet, or we can see it, but we're not being fully honest with ourselves because we don't know who we are without it. But we know that, like, this way, and it definitely is very common, by the way, among like achievers, strivers, people who are used to like, well, who would I be without this? Like I've done amazing things, so why can't I just transfer that skill set, that way of being into my next chapter? I mean, I say go for it. And there's coaching out there for that. There's lots of support for that, right? Take things to the next level. But if you have even a subtle sense and a subtle curiosity that there's something more to you that wants to come through. I mean, those are the people that I love to
Okay.
meet and I feel particularly called to support. So for example, a woman recently was saying, she's like, I grew up in a family where it's like we were poor. We did not have much money. So what I learned was I was like, this is never gonna happen. So I'm gonna achieve. I'm gonna, have an incredible career. I'm gonna make a lot of money now in midlife, so mid-50s is like, no, this is in some way, however her call to adventure has come to her. She's like, there's more creativity that wants to come through. And I keep finding that my obsession with achievement, success, etc., is interfering with that. Right. So this is where doing that work is absolutely critical for those who know, are like sensing
Yes.
something else wants to emerge.
Yes. So in that case, you're talking about the dying of the false self, which you talk about in the book.
Yeah.
What happens after, you kind of went through some of the steps, but what happens after you face your shadow, you face the grief? How do you take people to that next level?
Yes, great question. So, in that unknown territory, these are all kind of simultaneous steps. I say there's befriend the darkness, right? So, we're not running from it.
Mhm, mhm.
It's nothing to be afraid. The darkness, and you can find this in different myths and religious traditions, and some people have said this, but like the darkness of a cave, so caves are often present, but the darkness of a cave is not a tomb, it's a womb. So, this, as scary as it may be, this is this place of rebirth. So, you befriend the darkness. There's wander in the wild, and then face your death, it's a spiritual death in a way. It's
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
ego death. By the way, not done with force or vanquishing. It's done with kindness. And this is, you mentioned Parker Palmer. Wholeness is not about cutting off or judging or condemning or shame. It's about integrating various parts of ourselves, right? All of ourselves. So wholeness in facing our death is about with kindness, acknowledging those things that are no longer serving us so we can embrace the fullness of who we are. Now that's just a little context that sets us up for this third phase, rising to wholeness, and
Mhm.
which is related to your last question here. And the three steps that I talk about here are you return home, which is, well, I've changed. There's been deep shifts. Maybe again, not on the surface of my life, but I am fundamentally different. And guess what, Patricia, you know this, when you're different, it impacts everyone around you. Your world wants to kind of put you back in that box because that's how you've shown up. So there's work to do in relationships in terms of this return home. There's decisions you need to make about things in your life. Practices become really important again, right? These inner practices so that we can stabilize that sense of, what we've discovered about ourselves. We can carry it forward and not relapse. And then there's give your gift, step 8, and be still is step 9. Um, and step 10, I'll just say it's kind of on its own, but it's begin again because we go through this. There's multiple iterations of this journey in our lives.
It sounds like it's very important to have a guide like your book or a great teacher, a great mentor that supports you through the process. But if somebody's in this right now, like, are there, and I know you talked about rewilding and you talked about meditation, but are there rituals and tools that you recommend that people can go off and do on their own to be
Yes,
with
I love it.
all the jigglies inside of them?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So in my journey within coaching program, which I do one-on-one and in groups, there's 5 foundational practices. And I love, we're in an age right now, and you see this, there's so many practices and modalities and things and this ceremony and that. And it's like, it's overwhelming. Like, what do I do with all this?
Right, right.
Right. And
Yes.
it can be easy to just like you're at the buffet and you're doing it all, you're like trying all this stuff, but like what's happened is you're mistaking the tool for the actual transformation. You're just dabbling in all this stuff. How is it actually transforming and supporting you? So the 5 are, and you just mentioned it's meditation, these rewilding, which there's more to unpack there, but and then reflection, journaling. But the other 2 I want to mention here, one is especially relevant at the beginning, but throughout the entirety of the journey, it's subtraction. What I mean is, what do you need to remove from
Mm.
your life that is interfering both practically with you having space for these other things, right? But also, it's just distracting you. It's keeping you from tuning into your soul, from like engaging yourself at a deeper level. Overcommitted socially, binge watching and entertainment could be food and drink habits, could be whatever, lack of boundaries at work, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
subtraction is this is a practice and it's important at any phase, but I think especially the beginning. And the other one, and
I
this is
like
where
that.
I come alongside people. Oh, and by the way, subtraction, think about it, this is an ancient practice. What's fasting? That's what fasting is. You're intentionally withdrawing from something so that you can align with the divine, or any other type of abstinence that, or you go live in the desert, all those kinds of things. You don't need to do that now. There's other ways to subtract. But I also think in this journey, and this one is maybe a little harder for people to kind of understand on their own, though we're seeing an increased conversation about it, but rites of passage that mark these transitions. We're not great as a society with intentional ways of symbolically acknowledging what's going on, the shifts in our life, right?
Is that like a ritual? Are you talking about a
Yeah,
ritual?
so ritual, but by rites of passage. So rites of passage in cultures, I mean, we see them today still in like a bar or a bat mitzvah. It's a rite of passage, right? In tribal societies, you'd have a vision quest. You go out, you leave the safety of the village, you go through this whole unknown experience, and this is part of your entry into adulthood and full participation in another way in the community. We've sort of lost touch with these though, largely, and we don't have a lot for our, especially in midlife. So if you, and I want to tie this to what you ask. So practically speaking, let's imagine there's rites of passage you can engage in to mark the fact that you're letting go or you're leaving the familiar. You've left a job. You've your marriage has come to an end. You on your own can design something that could symbolize that. Oh, it's you're throwing something in the fire, you're immersing yourself in water. There's any number of things you can do. Or later, acknowledging the kind of leaving the release of this other part of yourself. You write a eulogy for that version of yourself, right? and have a ceremony. So when we're in this place of also maybe re-entering the world, rising to wholeness, we've got some clarity about our purpose. It also can be really powerful to have a rite of passage, which I like to call it's like a homecoming rite of passage.
Interesting.
Maybe you make a feast for yourself. Maybe you go on a little pilgrimage to symbolize it. But like ways of marking that, wow, I've been on this journey internally, especially, and I want to acknowledge that I have reclaimed something. I
Okay.
have reconnected with
Yeah.
myself, right? And then we have a symbolic memory of something that's been internal. So a couple years from now, when we're like little frazzled, we can look back and be like, oh no, it's all real.
Yeah.
Something's going on.
I love that idea. And I love the idea of celebrating these moments where you feel like there has been a big shift inside of you, however you want to celebrate it, like you
Yes.
were saying. In your book, you also encourage this idea of staying weird.
Yeah.
I think that's one of
Yeah.
your steps.
Yes. Yeah.
Talk about that. Like, what does that mean? Is that the anti-normal, quote unquote, anti-normal message?
Yeah, so the where that comes from is so Joseph Campbell. I was digging into his work more broadly, and I'd come across this author Thomas More in his book. He talks about
Hmm.
a meeting with Joseph Campbell. They're having breakfast. It was kind of before Joseph Campbell was like Hollywood famous because he had been teaching myth and whatnot forever. But Joseph Campbell was like the way Thomas More tells it. He's playing with this idea of what eventually becomes the phrase "follow your bliss," which you've probably heard of,
Okay,
right? It's
sure.
like
Yeah.
so Joseph Campbell says something like, follow your bliss. This is really about pursuing what's true to your being, expressing your purpose. And he says something like, and it will put you on a path where, I mean, help comes to you. I think he says doors will open where were no doors. There's a lot of Campbell quotes in my head right now, but this is a different way of living than that maybe mask guided version of ourselves, right? So why that's connected to the weird thing is he's talking with Thomas More and he hasn't fully gotten to follow your bliss yet, but he's like dancing around this phrase that's like be faithful to your weird
Yeah, I saw that it was spelled differently.
UYRD, which it comes from. I think it's like a ancient Norse term, so like Scandinavian. And it had this meaning. It was alluding to these sisters who would spin the threads of fate. Okay. And if you look at this will be very quick, but because I think this is super interesting. You look at where that word goes. So it has this aspect of like spinning your destiny, living your destiny. Weird becomes weird, which means strange or otherworldly, right? So there's a sense of connectedness to something more, I think captures this spiritual piece. And then weird is like odd and strange as we know it. And there is a sense that if you're following your bliss, you're living in this path, it is kind of weird. It's non-conventional. You're not living exclusively in response to and reaction to the expectations of society and what success looks like and how you should chart your course and plan your career and all these things. You're guided by an inner North Star. That's going to look weird sometimes. So that idea of stay weird it's part of when we continue this journey or the next phase of our journey, right? It's really staying connected to that and not slipping back into those old patterns or just trying to fit in. It's a place of vibrancy and vitality,
Yeah.
honestly.
When people go through your process or a process that looks like this, do a lot of their relationships change? Because I think sometimes, and I've heard this from some of our guests, when they go through some massive change in their own lives, it's very hard for other people who haven't gone through similar things to understand and even to empathize with them.
Such an important question. And I have multiple things filling my mind. So the first one is this in that step 2, get help. I talk about this Celtic phrase, anam cara. It means soul friend.
Mm,
Soul friend. So on this kind of journey of inner transformation, it's important to be on the lookout and receptive to and or know who they already are. But who's that soul friend? This is not someone who's encouraging you to play it safe, play by the rules. They're all about you, your flourishing. And part of what they do is they hold up a mirror to you so you can see those parts of yourself that maybe you can't see. This is like a faithful companion. And the reason I start there is to say that can't always be the person you're closest with, say your partner or even a dear friend, because what you're going through it does have a huge impact on them. So if you can have those people, and this is part of the role I play with people, you have someone who can serve as that outlet and support, then that's great. But then you have a task also. It's like, what is the appropriate amount of revelation or sharing you do with those who are close to you, right? You want to
Mhm.
be sharing. You want to be sharing. You don't need to overshare, but you at least want to share some details of what you're going through. Maybe not all the insights, but at least outwardly what it looks like. And they might be like, that's kind of weird. You're going to like wander in nature, or you're studying a jaguar because that's like an animal that you're learning from. That's odd. But like at least, you're keeping the communication lines open without them needing to bear the weight of the internal twists and turns
Yeah.
you're going through.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's
So
fair.
yeah, and then just the one other thing I'll say is as we reemerge with what we've reclaimed, like I said, it will impact our relationships. So hopefully there's ways that you've kept those lines open. And yes, we do need to be clear. There might be some renegotiating of relationships,
Mhm.
maybe some new boundaries, maybe new ways you need to show up, which actually brings your relationship to a whole new beautiful level. And also likely there'll be some new companions that you'll either have found or need to be on the lookout for because they resonate with your new, more fully expressed way of being.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of people find their new friends at the Modern Elder Academy, which I want to talk about in
Very true.
1 second. But
Yes.
before we close, what 3 ideas would you want to leave our midlife listeners with today? What are the three like sort of big ideas? I know we've talked about so much here.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Yeah. The first is slow down. If you feel like you're at a crossroads, if you are trying to figure out your next chapter, just slow down a bit. Slow down and make space for reflection and just to hear those things that are maybe been, behind all the noise that's in your head that's wanting you to like rush ahead and have everything figured out. Slow down. Things will unfold in the appropriate time. And you have the capacity to deal with the discomfort. You really do. The discomfort of an altered pace. So slow down. I also say everything is within you. This is like the anchor premise of all the work I do. I believe the wisdom you need is within you. If there's anything I've said here that resonates with you, it's because you already know it. So and most people, actually, I think all of us, we're overloaded with information. We have all the info we need. But if we want to experience transformation, it's the question is how are we engaging that information? How are we changing our pace? How are we going inward so that we can hear what we really need to hear? So slow down, go within. And I think the last one would be um, grace. Show yourself grace, receive grace. If you're feeling like, oh, I wish I would have figured this out 10 years ago. No, this is exactly the right time. Or if you're saying, I can't believe I didn't know this already. Oh, it's fine. You're exactly where you need to be.
so that's the third one. You're exactly where you need to
Yeah.
be. Okay, great.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you want to say about MEA before we close?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, there's offerings for people who are in all kinds of different situations. Our core offerings, our pillars are around this idea of cultivating purpose. So discerning your purpose for this next phase, navigating transitions, right? We mentioned all kinds of transitions in this conversation. And the third is really around the theme of wisdom. How do you tap into the unique wisdom that you carry because of your life experience? So we have those. And then we have we've talked about them earlier, all sorts of incredible people from Krista Tippett to Arthur Brooks to Anne Lamott, Elizabeth Gilbert, so many great people, including a bunch of folks you have not heard of, likely, who have all kinds of offerings. So check it out at meawisdom.com. And I personally invite you to join me. I'll be in Santa Fe for a Discovering the Hero's Journey in Midlife workshop. So if these themes resonate, come join me for that. February, we'll be exploring wisdom at our Baja campus in Mexico and have one in March. It has not been posted yet, but around spirituality for the second half of life. So I love being in the room with people. So, any of your people, Patricia, I'd be honored to meet and hopefully
Yeah.
you someday too.
Awesome. Ben, thank you so much. You're doing such great work. I love this stuff. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for taking time to be with me and for your curiosity. Really appreciate it.